morning.
Hello.
Unless it's
Do
the evening
you know
when you're
how?
watching.
Do you know our welcome is becoming less and less
No.
dramatic? Hello.
Woohoo!
Right.
And your weekly update on the weather on Friday morning, which was 2 days ago from when you're watching, is that it is slightly raining, but we'll be okay.
We were hoping it was going to snow. At least I was hoping it was going to snow.
I'm not hoping it's going to snow. Not unless it snows enough to close the school.
Okay, so
We're on week 3.
Week 3
of the Book of Ruth, and we hope that you're enjoying it and that you're finding it interesting. It's a great story.
This chapter needs a bit of context.
Yeah.
I think if you went into this chapter thinking
it works the way that our society works right now.
it might be a bit of a shock.
It would throw you a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, it would. Yeah. So the story of this particular chapter is where Naomi obviously is feeling slightly better. It would suggest.
Yeah.
And she is taking into account Ruth and how she is, and the fact that she's alone and
that she could do with her own home, as in it would be great if she could get married again.
Yeah, and provided for is what she says in verse 1.
Yeah.
And so she concocts this plan of sending Ruth to Boaz
to essentially say, we know that you're our kinsman redeemer, which we've talked about before, about how Boaz has, because he's related and under their law that God had given them for the protection of widows and orphans and the poor, that he was in a position to redeem the land that had belonged to Naomi's husband, Elimelech, and therefore bring it back into the family line so that the land wasn't lost, the inheritance was still there. And that part of that redeeming of the land would also be to marry Ruth, which sounds really strange to us in our culture, but it was part of their law about protecting people who were otherwise really vulnerable and didn't have anyone to provide for them, like Naomi and Ruth are in this story. So the way that she does that is unusual to us, but essentially it was just...
She basically says, glamour yourself up and go and check out Boaz.
No, she doesn't. She doesn't say that at all.
No, she doesn't.
But it's a way, it's part of something that, a custom that they would have had, where a woman could go and say, you're my kinsman redeemer, and I'd really like you to do that. I'd really like you
But
to
she does say to
land.
her, dress yourself up,
Yeah,
wear your
does,
best clothes, and put your makeup
Present
on
yourself
and put
well.
yourself well. But I think that's also an element it's also for Ruth a choice, because she could go, do you know what, I'm not ready yet.
Yeah.
But actually she does that, and actually it's a sign that she's moving on from chapter 1, where everything, she lost her husband and there was all that pain and suffering.
So Ruth goes and essentially asks Boaz to be her kinsman redeemer and to redeem the family line and to marry her. And he is so honourable, because he could just go, yeah, great, that would be great. But because he's so honourable and because he...
Let's go back a bit. So where they're meeting? Where
on the threshing floor. So
okay,
the harvest has been brought in, and everything then has to be bashed, basically, really hard to get the grains off of the stalks of the barley and the wheat. And then there would have been a big mountain of the grain, and it'd been incredibly valuable.
And do you know what? I was reading this, and this particular point is all about male camaraderie. It's all about
so women were not allowed on the threshing floor.
Eating and drinking and celebrating the harvest.
But basically, some of the men would then sleep on the threshing floor around the grain to keep it safe, because it was so valuable. But women wouldn't have been there traditionally. But Ruth goes and she basically sort of lies down at Boaz's feet, and there would have been other people around going to sleep as well.
Which for us is like, that's pretty weird.
But he wakes up and he says, why are you lying there? And she says, you're my kinsman redeemer, and I would like you to do that. I'd like you to marry me and redeem. So Boaz does this, but he says to her, there's another relative who's closer than I am. So we don't know how he was related to Naomi's husband Elimelech, but he says, I know that there's a relation who's closer. So they get kind of first choice, in a sense, at redeeming the family land and marrying you, Ruth. So but he says, I'm going to sort this out today. So he sends Ruth home, but he sends her home with her shawl full of grain, so that again she goes back to Naomi with her arms full of blessing. She doesn't go back empty-handed. As we've seen at the beginning, there was this whole theme of emptiness and fullness. Yeah. And Boaz still sends her back. He says, I can't promise you
this is
that
more than
yet.
And this is more than before.
Yeah. But his generosity, again, his heart towards them both, is that he wants fullness and blessing for them. And so he sends her home with her shawl full of grain. And then we have the close of the chapter where Naomi says, right, now we have to wait because Boaz will sort it out today and he will come and tell us. So one of the things I think is really interesting here is that Naomi and Ruth got back to Bethlehem, and after a couple of days, presumably they found somewhere to stay, and they've got a room somewhere, and then Ruth says, I'm going to go out and try and glean some of the grain, as is allowed in the law, so that we've got something to eat, so we can provide for ourselves. And that first day, she just happens to be in Boaz's field, and she goes back, and Naomi says, oh, Boaz, he's our kinsman and redeemer. Then we had a whole chapter where Ruth goes every day and is part of the harvest, and Boaz protects her and gives her more and blesses her and is so generous, and
it's annoying me.
Everything else. Right? And yet in all that time, Naomi doesn't push it and go, he's our kinsman redeemer, go and ask him now, go and ask him to redeem us now, you should ask him to marry you right now. There's none of that. There's just, they wait, they're patient, they receive the blessing, they receive the generosity, and then the harvest is over. And then one day, starts chapter 3, one day, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, should I not try to find a home for you where you will be well provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you've been a kinsman of ours? And so there's no sense of pushing their own agenda or hurrying things through, but there is a sense of receiving the blessing as it comes, and then patience as well. And even in this chapter, Ruth says to Naomi, I'll do whatever you say. So she has patience not to kind of go, well, I should just go and ask him right now, and and then she has patience to do it Naomi's way, because Naomi knows the custom of how it should be done, within the Israelites. And then she has to have patience again, and they have patience because Boaz says, I need you to go home now, because I need to go and see, if this other closer kinsman redeemer wants to redeem the land and marry you. And they have to go home, and at the end, Naomi says, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens. And the word wait is also sort of the word for sat in that language. So there's this sense of we've just got to sit and just be patient and wait and see what happens and trust, for God's blessing again. And I just think that's such a lesson for us, isn't it? That when we are going through something really difficult, we just want to get to the end and we want it to be sorted and we want the answer, and we can try and push it and do it our way. And yet this is such a beautiful story of not doing that, of doing things God's way and allowing his timing.
And oftentimes it's the process that God works in as much as it is what happens at the end. Because actually in this particular section you see, if it had gone really quickly, then there wouldn't be that opportunity for Ruth and Naomi to trust that God had it all in hand.
Yeah.
I mean, they went to Bethlehem with the expectation of, that's where God is obviously doing something. I wonder if he can do something for me.
Because there was food there again. Yeah, and that sense of it being home and it being, God's land, God's place and God's people. So that's just really exciting, isn't it? And also that, during all that time, they could see Boaz's character more. And
it's interesting, the writer in the story compares, Boaz calls her the same thing. So he says to her in verse 11, all the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. And so it suggests that they're balanced. There's no one is better than the other, which is really, really good.
Yeah.
And it links also.
It's not really about better, but they're both people of noble character. That they are.
Well, they're on equal plane.
Yeah,
they're suited for each other. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Which links also to that phrase. Links also to Proverbs 31:10.
Yes.
Which is about what a noble wife is.
Yeah.
Which is interesting too.
Yeah. So, did you get anything else
from this
passage?
Well, for me, there were a couple of things. The first one was that that we can often be discouraged by disappointments.
Yeah.
And disappointments can lead us to not acting out. So it could have been quite easy for Ruth and Naomi not to do anything.
Yeah.
And to go, do you know what? I lost my husband's. Well, that's it.
I'm just going to give up.
I'm just going to give up. Yeah. I'm just going to be this way for the rest of my life. Rather than actually looking and seeing what God was doing and being able to step out and going, okay, let's go in this direction.
Yeah, and look for God's blessing as well and receive it.
Yeah. So for me, that was one thing about how we, the question is, are we still finding places in our lives where we are disappointed, where it may be that God didn't turn up in the way we expected, and therefore we aren't able to come to Him with open hands to receive what He has now. Another one was that last verse. So I'm now looking at all the last verses, and so in 18 it says, "Then Naomi said, 'Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today.'" So for me, there's this, again, it comes back to the element of waiting, and oftentimes we're not very good at waiting. I used to be a 100-metre sprinter and long jumper and fast bowler.
Run upstairs at 100 miles an hour.
So I do things naturally in my being is to do things very fast. So I've had to learn to slow down, and that's been really good. But it's quite hard if you're used to going at 1,000 miles an hour to slow down. Sometimes you can make, if I may say, excuses to say, do you know what, I can't slow down because if I slow down, then things aren't going to get done. But then if that's our argument, and I've been there myself, then that doesn't allow God to step into the points and take the areas where you let go of, because you're controlling everything else in one sense. And then from that, it then leads me to the conversation and the story in my head, because it's so easy for us to then look at, this, what's going to happen in the future, and it may go wrong. I mean, the potential, we've got this amazing story taking place, and then suddenly in verse 12, although this is true, I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related, and it's suddenly this one statement can change the future.
What? I don't know this person. Who is this person?
Yeah. So, and you don't know what the character is of that person.
Yeah.
And so there is that danger of, well, actually, it's not going to go where I thought it was. And so often, especially now in COVID, I expect you may have well been in this place where, suddenly something's been said on the news, and suddenly your mind has gone in 1,000 miles an hour. This could happen. What if? Yeah. And again, that comes back to what...
Instead of waiting and saying, God, I'm going to wait to see what you do and trust you for good things.
And that comes back to our last term's talk with
John Mark
Comer about resting, and the fact that resting allows us to wait, it allows us to slow down, and it stops us from living in that place of what if, because we have that change in mindset.
Yeah.
So that's where I came from today, and I'm really, it gets to the point where it's like, what's going to happen? Is there?
We do know what happened, but we're still excited to share it with you next week.
Yes.
When we come to episode 4.
So that's where we're at today. So I hope you enjoyed it. We will see you next week, and again, if you want to connect, please dial in on a Sunday morning and listen to and join in our activities, or in the Connect group where
it's
on
been
website.
Great to have some of you, some new people joining in with Connect groups, which has been really fab the last couple of weeks, and we really want to encourage anyone who's watching, even if you're not in Hemel or you're not necessarily connected to us as a church at the moment, we would love you to have a go at joining one of our Connect groups. They're all really friendly and easygoing.
Okay, so see you later.
Bye.
Bye. Hi guys, it's so good to have you this morning, whether it be on Facebook or on Zoom. We are Hemel Vineyard Church, and we're just doing life together as we follow Jesus. If you want to be part of that journey, then feel free to come and join us, whether it be on Zoom, again on Facebook next week, or drop us a line and have a conversation with us. We'd love to hear from you. Another place you can find out what's going on would be to check out our website, which is www.hemelvineyard.org.uk. I pray this week that you would know Jesus' love and his presence with you in whatever you face. See you next week. Bye.